The sound of my backup generator humming to life at 3 in the morning was the sweetest thing I had ever heard, especially considering the ice storm had knocked out power to half of Meadowbrook Springs, Illinois, for the past 6 hours. I stood in my garage, watching the LED lights flicker back on in my house, feeling a wave of relief wash over me as the furnace kicked in. My name is Lucas York, and I had just installed this beast of a machine 2 weeks ago after the last power outage nearly cost me a freezer full of meat and a ruined vacation when the pipes almost burst. The generator ran for maybe 40 minutes before the main power came back on, and it automatically shut itself down like it was supposed to. I went back to bed, grateful for the investment, and slept soundly for the first time since the storm started. That was Monday night. By Thursday morning, I had a certified letter from the Meadowbrook Springs Homeowners Association waiting in my mailbox. I tore open the envelope while standing at the end of my driveway, still in my work clothes from my shift at the manufacturing plant. The letter was printed on expensive-looking cream-colored paper with the HOA logo embossed at the top. It informed me that I was in violation of Section 7, Subsection D, Paragraph 3 of the Community Noise Ordinance. Apparently, my generator exceeded the acceptable decibel limit for residential equipment and constituted a disturbance to my neighbors. I had 10 days to remove the generator or face a fine of $250, with an additional $100 per day if I failed to comply. I read the letter 3 times, standing there in the February cold, my breath forming clouds in front of my face. The generator was brand new, EPA certified, and specifically marketed as a quiet residential model. I had done my research before buying it. The thing was quieter than my neighbor's riding lawn mower. Hell, it was quieter than a normal conversation. I looked down at the signature at the bottom of the letter. Brenda Patterson, HOA president. Of course it was Brenda. The woman had been a thorn in my side since I moved into this neighborhood 2 years ago. She was in her mid-50s, with that particular haircut that seemed to be standard issue for women who enjoyed making other people miserable. You know the one. Short, angular, with blonde highlights that looked like they were done in someone's kitchen. She drove a white Lexus SUV and wore athleisure, where even though I had never seen her do anything more athletic than walk to her mailbox. I crumpled the letter in my fist and walked back into my house. My girlfriend, Deanna Evans, was in the kitchen making dinner. She looked up when I came in and her smile faded when she saw my expression. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting down the wooden spoon she had been using to stir pasta sauce. I handed her the crumpled letter. She smoothed it out on the counter and read it, her dark eyebrows drawing together as she processed the words. "This is ridiculous," she said finally. "The generator barely makes any noise. I can barely hear it from inside the house." "I know," I said, pulling out a chair and sitting down heavily. "But Brenda has it out for me. She has since I painted the house." That was true. When I had bought the house, it had been a dingy beige color that looked like someone had mixed all the worst paint samples together. I had repainted it a nice charcoal gray with white trim. It looked sharp and modern. Brenda had sent me a letter then too, claiming that the color was not on the approved list. I had checked the HOA bylaws. There was no approved color list. I had sent her a polite letter back explaining this, with copies of the relevant sections of the bylaws highlighted. She had not been happy about being proven wrong. "What are you going to do?" Deanna asked. "I am going to fight it," I said. "I paid $3,000 for that generator. I am not removing it because Brenda decided to abuse her power." The next morning, I took a personal day from work and went to the hardware store. I bought a professional-grade decibel meter, the kind that contractors use to measure noise levels for compliance purposes. It cost me $200, but I figured it was worth it if it proved my case. I spent the next hour testing the generator from various points around my property. At the property line, the generator measured 58 decibels. From inside my house, it measured 42 decibels. From the street, it measured 55 decibels. I did my research online. The Illinois State Noise Ordinance allowed for residential equipment to operate at up to 75 decibels during daytime hours and 65 decibels at night. My generator was well within the legal limits, even during nighttime operation. I documented everything with photos and timestamps. I created a neat little folder with all my evidence. Then, I decided to do something that I probably should have done a long time ago. I got up at 6:30 on Saturday morning and took my decibel meter outside. Like clockwork, at 7 o'clock, the HOA contracted landscaping crew showed up in their fleet of white trucks with the Meadowbrook Springs HOA logo on the side. They unloaded their equipment and got to work. The leaf blowers were the worst. Industrial-grade machines that sounded like jet engines. I walked around the common areas, measuring the noise levels. The leaf blowers registered between 95 and 103 decibels, depending on how close I was to them. The lawn mowers were around 88 decibels. The edgers were around 92 decibels. This went on for 3.5 hours, every single Saturday morning without fail. I took videos. I took photos. I documented everything with timestamps and measurements. By the time the crew packed up and left at 10:30, I had enough evidence to bury Brenda Patterson and her hypocritical HOA board. On Monday, I drafted a response letter to the HOA. I kept it professional but firm. I outlined the specific noise measurements of my generator. I cited the Illinois State Noise Ordinance. I provided photos of my testing methodology. And then, in a separate paragraph, I politely inquired about the noise levels of the HOA contracted landscaping crew, which exceeded state noise ordinances by 20 to 30 decibels every Saturday morning. I concluded by requesting a formal hearing before the HOA board to address these concerns. I sent the letter certified mail with return receipt requested. I sent copies to every member of the HOA board, whose addresses I could find in the community directory. I kept copies of everything for my records. The response came faster than I expected. 2 days later, I received a phone call from a number I did not recognize. I almost did not answer it, but something made me pick up. "Mr. York," a woman's voice said. It was not Brenda. "Speaking," I said cautiously. "This is Margaret Chen. I am on the HOA board. I received your letter and I wanted to reach out to you directly." I sat up straighter. Margaret Chen, I knew her vaguely. She lived 3 streets over in one of the bigger houses. I had seen her at a few community events. She seemed reasonable, which was probably why Brenda kept her at arm's length. "Thank you for calling," I said. "I want to apologize for the tone of the initial letter you received," Margaret said. I was not aware that it had been sent until after the fact. Brenda sometimes acts unilaterally without board approval, which is not appropriate. I felt a small spark of hope. "I appreciate that. I reviewed your response and the documentation you provided. Your generator is clearly within legal limits. More concerning to me is the information about the landscaping crew. I was not aware that their equipment was operating at those noise levels. Every Saturday morning," I said. "For hours." "I believe you," Margaret said. "I live far enough from the common areas that I do not hear them, but I have received complaints from other residents that I now realize were legitimate. Brenda dismissed them as people being overly sensitive." "So, what happens now?" I asked. I am calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow night, 7 o'clock at the community center. I would like you to attend and present your evidence. All board members will be required to attend, and we will address both issues." "I will be there," I said. After I hung up, I told Deanna what had happened. She looked relieved. "Maybe this will finally put Brenda in her place," she said. "Maybe," I said, though I was not convinced it would be that easy. The next evening, I dressed in business casual clothes and gathered all my documentation into a professional-looking binder. Deanna came with me for moral support. The community center was a small building near the neighborhood entrance, mostly used for HOA meetings and the occasional birthday party rental. When we arrived, there were already a dozen cars in the parking lot. Inside, the main room was set up with a long table at the front where the board members sat, and rows of chairs facing them. I recognized Margaret Chen immediately. She was in her early 40s, wearing a blue blazer and looking professional. Next to her was Tom Reynolds, the treasurer, a retired accountant who always looked vaguely uncomfortable at these things. On Margaret's other side was Susan Miller, the secretary, a nervous-looking woman in her 60s who was constantly taking notes on everything. And then there was Brenda, sitting in the center seat like a queen on her throne. She was wearing a bright pink blazer that matched her lipstick, and she looked at me with barely concealed contempt when I walked in. Next to her was the fifth board member, Gary Thompson, who owned a real estate company and mostly seemed to vote however Brenda told him to vote. The room was surprisingly full. I counted at least 20 residents in attendance, which was unusual for a regular HOA meeting. Word must have gotten out. Margaret called the meeting to order at 7 o'clock sharp. She went through the basic formalities, then got right to the point. "We are here tonight to address a noise complaint that was filed against Mr. Lucas York regarding his backup generator, and a counter-complaint that Mr. York has filed regarding the HOA contracted landscaping services. Mr. York, would you like to present your case?" I stood up and walked to the front of the room. I had prepared a brief presentation on my laptop, which I connected to the projector. I went through everything systematically, the specifications of my generator, the noise measurements I had taken, the relevant Illinois state ordinances, photos and videos with timestamps. I kept it factual and professional. Then I moved on to the landscaping crew. I showed the noise measurements I had taken on Saturday morning. I played a short video clip of the leaf blowers in action, and several people in the audience winced at the volume even through my phone's small speaker. I cited the same state ordinances and showed how the landscaping equipment exceeded legal limits by significant margins. In summary, I concluded, my generator operates well within legal noise limits and only runs during power outages, which are infrequent. The HOA contracted landscaping crew operates at illegal noise levels every single Saturday morning for multiple hours. I am requesting that the violation notice against me be withdrawn and that the HOA address the ongoing noise violations created by their own contractors. I sat down. Deanna squeezed my hand. There was a moment of silence, and then one of the residents in the back started clapping. Others joined in. Brenda's face turned red. "That is quite enough," Brenda said sharply. "Mr. York, your presentation is very impressive, but you are missing the point. Your generator disturbed your neighbors in the middle of the night. That is unacceptable regardless of the technical specifications." "Which neighbors?" I asked calmly. "I would like to know who filed the complaint." Brenda's jaw tightened. "That information is confidential." "Actually, according to our bylaws, any resident who is the subject of a complaint has the right to know who filed it," Margaret interjected, flipping through a copy of the HOA governing documents. Section 12, subsection A. Brenda shot Margaret a look that could have melted steel. Fine. The complaint was filed by Mrs. Dorothy Hamilton, who lives next door to Mr. York. I turned around and looked at the audience. Dorothy Hamilton was sitting 3 rows back. She was 82 years old, sweet as could be, and deaf as a post. I knew for a fact that she wore hearing aids that she frequently forgot to turn on. There was no way she had heard my generator from inside her house. "Mrs. Hamilton," I said gently, "did you file a complaint about my generator?" The elderly woman looked confused. "What's that, dear?" "My generator," I said louder. "Did it bother you?" "Oh, your generator," she said, her face brightening. "No, dear, I did not even know you had one. Brenda came by last week and asked me to sign something. She said it was for neighborhood beautification. I just signed it." My eyes are not what they used to be. The room erupted. Multiple people started talking at once. Brenda's face went from red to purple. "Order," Margaret said, banging a gavel on the table. "Everyone please calm down." "This is outrageous," said a man I recognized as living 2 streets over. "Brenda, did you forge Mrs. Hamilton's complaint?" "I did no such thing," Brenda snapped. "Mrs. Hamilton signed the document of her own free will." "Under false pretenses," Margaret said coldly, "which is fraudulent misrepresentation." "I think we need to take a vote on the generator issue," Tom Reynolds said, speaking up for the first time. "I move that we withdraw the violation notice against Mr. York. His generator is clearly in compliance with all applicable laws." "I second that motion," Susan Miller said quickly. "All in favor?" Margaret asked. Margaret, Tom, and Susan raised their hands. Gary looked at Brenda uncertainly, then slowly raised his hand as well. Brenda sat with her arms crossed, glaring at everyone. "The motion passes 4-1, Margaret said. "Mr. York, the violation notice is withdrawn. You may keep your generator." I felt a wave of relief, but I knew this was not over yet. "Now, regarding the landscaping crew," Margaret continued. "Mr. York has provided compelling evidence that our contractors are operating equipment that violates state noise ordinances. This is a liability issue for the HOA. We could be fined by the county if someone files a formal complaint. The landscaping crew has been with us for 15 years, Brenda said. They do excellent work. That may be true, but they need to use quieter equipment or adjust their schedule, Margaret said. I move that we require our landscaping contractor to either switch to electric equipment that operates within legal noise limits, or move their work to weekday afternoons when fewer residents are home. I second that, Tom said. This vote was more contentious. Margaret, Tom, and Susan voted in favor. Brenda and Gary voted against. The motion passed 3-2. I will contact the landscaping company tomorrow, Margaret said. Meeting adjourned. As people started to file out, several residents came up to shake my hand and thank me. One woman told me she had been complaining about the Saturday morning noise for 2 years and had been ignored. A man said he worked night shifts and the leaf blowers woke him up every weekend. I felt vindicated, but I also felt uneasy. Brenda had left immediately after the meeting ended and she had looked furious. That went well, Deanna said as we walked to the car. Too well, I said. Brenda is not going to let this go. I was right. Over the next 2 weeks, I received 3 more violation notices from the HOA. The first claimed that my lawn had weeds that violated the landscaping standards. I went outside and inspected my lawn. There were 4 dandelions total. I took photos, then went and counted the dandelions in Brenda's yard. She had 27. I documented that too and sent a response letter. The second violation notice claimed that my garbage cans were visible from the street outside of collection hours. This was technically true because my garbage cans were stored on the side of my house. And if you stood at a very specific angle at the end of my driveway and craned your neck, you could see about 3 inches of one can. I built a small fence to block them from view and sent photos proving compliance. The third violation notice claimed that my mailbox was not regulation black. My mailbox was black. It had always been black. I took a photo of my mailbox next to a color swatch from the hardware store labeled True Black and sent that in too. Each violation came with a potential fine of $250. Each one required me to take time off work to address. Each one was clearly retaliatory harassment. After the third notice, I called Margaret Chen again. "I am aware of what is happening," she said, sounding tired. "Several of us on the board are aware. Brenda is acting unilaterally again. She is supposed to get board approval before issuing violation notices, but she has been bypassing that process." "What can I do?" I asked. "Document everything, which I know you are already doing. I am working behind the scenes to address this. We have a regular board meeting next month, and I am planning to introduce a motion to remove Brenda as president. I have been talking to other residents, and there is a lot of support for it." "A month is a long time," I said. "I know. Just hang in there." I did hang in there, but it got worse before it got better. The next violation notice claimed that I was running a business out of my home, which was prohibited by the HOA covenants. This was based on the fact that I occasionally did freelance consulting work for manufacturing companies, which I did entirely online, and which had zero impact on the neighborhood. I responded with a detailed letter explaining that remote work done entirely via computer and phone did not constitute a home business under the definitions in the covenants. Then, Brenda started showing up at my house. The first time was on a Tuesday evening. I was grilling dinner in my backyard when I heard my doorbell ring. Deanna answered it and came to get me. "Brenda is at the front door," she said. "She wants to talk to you." I put down my spatula and went to the front door. Brenda was standing on my porch with her phone in her hand, taking photos of my house. "Can I help you?" I asked. "I am conducting an inspection," she said without looking at me. "The board has received complaints about your property." "The board or just you?" I asked. "The HOA president has the authority to inspect properties for compliance," she said. "Actually, according to our bylaws, inspections require 24 hours written notice and must be approved by a majority vote of the board," I said. I had memorized the relevant sections by this point. "Do you have written authorization from the board?" Her jaw tightened. "I do not need authorization. I am the president." "Then you are trespassing," I said calmly. "Please leave my property." "You cannot talk to me like that," she said, her voice rising. I just did. "Leave now, or I will call the police." She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked back to her white Lexus. She sat in her car for another 5 minutes just watching my house before finally driving away. "That was creepy," Deanna said from behind me. "Yeah," I agreed. The next Saturday morning, the landscaping crew showed up at 7 o'clock as usual, but this time they had new equipment. Electric leaf blowers, battery-powered mowers, and quiet edgers. The noise level was dramatically reduced. I took my decibel meter outside and measured. The loudest equipment registered at 68 decibels, well within legal limits. I saw Margaret Chen walking her dog later that afternoon and stopped to thank her. "Do not thank me yet," she said. "Brenda is fighting the new contract. She is claiming that the electric equipment is not as effective and that the HOA is wasting money." "Is that true?" I asked. "No. The new contract is actually slightly cheaper because electric equipment has lower maintenance costs." but facts do not seem to matter to Brenda when she has decided something. What is her problem with me specifically? I asked. I have tried to be a good neighbor. I follow the rules. I maintain my property. Margaret hesitated, then sighed. Do you really want to know? Yes. She wanted to buy your house when it went on the market 2 years ago. She was planning to rent it out as an investment property. You outbid her. She has been bitter about it ever since. I stared at her. You are kidding. I wish I was. Brenda holds grudges. She made life hell for another resident a few years ago who beat her bid on a house. He eventually sold and moved out of the neighborhood just to get away from her harassment. Well, I am not moving, I said firmly. Good, Margaret said. The neighborhood needs more people who are willing to stand up to her. The regular monthly HOA board meeting was scheduled for the first Thursday in March. Deanna and I arrived early and found the community center already packed. There had to be 40 people there, which was unheard of for a regular meeting. Apparently, word had spread about what was happening. The meeting started with standard business. Budget reports, approval of previous meeting minutes, discussion of routine maintenance issues. Then Margaret introduced her motion. I move that the board vote to remove Brenda Patterson as HOA president due to repeated violations of board procedures, harassment of residents, and misuse of her authority. The room went silent. Brenda's face turned white, then red. You cannot do that, she said. Actually, according to our bylaws, yes we can, Margaret said. Section 8. Subsection C allows for removal of any board officer with a 2/3 majority vote of the board. This is a coup, Brenda said, her voice shaking with anger. This is accountability, Margaret replied calmly. You have issued violation notices without board approval. You have harassed residents. You have trespassed on private property. You have misrepresented complaints. You have acted unilaterally when you are supposed to be working as part of a team. This behavior is unacceptable and it needs to stop. I second the motion, Tom Reynolds said. Discussion, Margaret asked. Susan Miller cleared her throat nervously. I have been on this board for 6 years. I have watched Brenda bully people for all of that time. I have been too scared to say anything because I did not want to become her next target. But Mr. York is right to stand up to her, and I support this motion. Gary Thompson looked uncomfortable. Look, I think maybe we are being a bit harsh here. Brenda has done a lot of good for this neighborhood. Name one thing, Margaret challenged. Gary opened his mouth, then closed it. He could not think of anything. Several residents asked to speak. One by one, they came forward with stories of harassment. A couple who had been fined repeatedly for having a political yard sign during an election, which was protected by state law. A family who had been cited for having a play structure in their backyard that was supposedly too tall, even though it was clearly within the limits specified in the covenants. An elderly man who had been told his medical equipment van could not park in his driveway because it was unsightly. The stories went on and on. By the time everyone had finished speaking, Brenda looked shaken. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. All in favor of removing Brenda Patterson as HOA president? Margaret asked. Margaret, Tom, Susan, and eventually Gary all raised their hands. The motion passes 4-1, Margaret said. Brenda, you will remain on the board as a regular member, but you are no longer president. I nominate Tom Reynolds as the new president. I second that, Susan said quickly. Tom was elected unanimously. Even Brenda voted for him, probably because she was too stunned to object. The meeting concluded with a discussion of new policies to prevent future abuse of power. All violation notices would require approval from at least 3 board members. All inspections would require written notice and board approval. All complaints would be verified before action was taken. Residents who were the subject of complaints would have the right to face their accusers. As we left the meeting, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Deanna was smiling. "It is finally over," she said. "I hope so," I said, but it was not over. Not quite. 2 weeks later, I came home from work to find Deanna standing in the kitchen with a strange expression on her face. "What is wrong?" I asked. "You got another letter from the HOA," she said, handing me an envelope. I opened it warily, expecting another violation notice. Instead, it was a letter from Tom Reynolds, the new president. It was an apology. A formal written apology on behalf of the HOA for the harassment I had endured. It acknowledged that I had been wrongfully targeted, and that the previous administration had failed in its duty to treat all residents fairly. The letter concluded by thanking me for bringing important issues to light and helping to make the neighborhood a better place. I sat down at the kitchen table and read the letter 3 times. "They apologized," I said, surprised. "That is good, right?" Deanna asked. "Yeah," I said. "That is really good." Spring arrived and the neighborhood seemed different somehow, lighter. The new board was more responsive and more fair. The landscaping crew continued to use their quiet electric equipment. I stopped receiving violation notices. Brenda still lived in the neighborhood, but she kept to herself mostly. I would see her occasionally driving past in her white Lexus, but she never made eye contact. Then, in early May, I got a call from Margaret Chen again. "I wanted to give you a heads up about something," she said. "Brenda is selling her house and moving out of the neighborhood." "Really?" I asked, surprised. "She put it on the market yesterday. I think after losing the presidency, she realized that she had burned too many bridges here. People do not forget that kind of behavior." "Where is she going?" I asked. "I heard she bought a condo in one of those age-restricted communities in Arizona, the kind with a strict HOA. I almost laughed at the irony. "Well, I hope she is happy there. Honestly, I hope she learned something from this experience, but I am not holding my breath." After we hung up, I went outside to work in my yard. It was a beautiful spring day, warm and sunny. I had planted a vegetable garden in the backyard, and the tomato plants were already starting to flower. My generator sat silently in the garage, ready for the next power outage but otherwise unobtrusive. Deanna came outside with 2 glasses of lemonade. We sat on the back porch, watching the birds and enjoying the peace and quiet. Well, relative quiet. I could hear someone mowing their lawn a few streets over, but it was just a low electric hum, not the angry roar of a gas engine. "Do you ever regret moving here?" Deanna asked. I thought about it. The past few months had been stressful and frustrating. I had spent hours documenting violations, writing letters, attending meetings, and fighting against a system that seemed designed to grind people down. But I had also discovered that there were good people in this neighborhood who were willing to stand up for what was right when it mattered. "No," I said, "I do not regret it. This is our home, and it is a better place now than it was before." "Thanks to you," she said. "Thanks to a lot of people," I corrected. "Margaret, Tom, Susan, all those residents who spoke up at the meeting. Change does not happen because of one person. It happens because enough people decide that things need to be different." She smiled and leaned against my shoulder. "That is very philosophical of you. I have had a lot of time to think about it." We sat there in comfortable silence for a while, just enjoying the afternoon. Then my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a number I did not recognize. "Mr. York, this is Janet Williams. I live on Oakwood Drive. I just received a violation notice that I think is unfair. I heard about what you went through with Brenda Patterson. Would you be willing to give me some advice on how to fight this?" I showed the text to Deanna. She raised her eyebrows. "You are becoming the neighborhood expert on HOA disputes," she said. Apparently, I said. I typed out a response offering to meet with Janet and discuss her situation. Over the next few weeks, I heard from 3 more residents who were dealing with questionable HOA violations. In each case, I was able to help them understand their rights and document their compliance with the actual rules. 2 of the violations were withdrawn after the residents provided proper documentation. The third went to a board hearing, where the residents successfully argued their case. Tom Reynolds called me in June to ask if I would be interested in joining the HOA board. There was an open seat after Brenda resigned completely and moved to Arizona. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I do not think I am the right person for that. I am happy to help residents navigate disputes, but I do not want to be part of the official structure. I understand, Tom said. But if you ever change your mind, the offer stands. We need people like you who actually care about fairness. In July, the HOA organized a neighborhood block party. It was the first one they had done in years. Someone had suggested it at a board meeting, and the new leadership had enthusiastically approved it. They closed off the main street through the neighborhood and set up tables and grills. Families came out with food to share. Kids rode bikes and played in the street. Someone set up a bounce house. Someone else brought a sound system and played music. Deanna and I walked through the crowd, chatting with neighbors we had never really met before. It turned out that a lot of people had their own stories about dealing with Brenda and the old HOA administration. There was a sense of relief in the air, like everyone had been holding their breath for years and could finally exhale. I was standing near the grill, flipping burgers for anyone who wanted one, when Margaret Chen came up to me with a beer in her hand. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "For what?" I asked. "For not backing down, for fighting when it would have been easier to just give up. You made it possible for the rest of us to find our courage." "I just wanted to keep my generator," I said with a smile. "It was never about the generator," Margaret said. "It was about standing up to a bully. And you did that. You showed everyone that one person can make a difference." I thought about that later, as Deanna and I walked home in the twilight. The street was littered with paper plates and cups, evidence of a successful party. Neighbors called out good nights as we passed. I could hear kids laughing in backyards and the low murmur of adults talking on front porches. This was what a neighborhood was supposed to be. Not a collection of houses governed by arbitrary rules and enforced by petty tyrants, but a community where people looked out for each other and worked together to solve problems. When we got home, I checked the weather forecast on my phone. Clear skies for the next week. No chance of storms. No need for the generator. But it was there in the garage if I needed it, and knowing that gave me a sense of security that had nothing to do with electricity. Diana went upstairs to take a shower, and I sat on the front porch for a while, just enjoying the evening. The generator saga had started with a winter ice storm and ended with a summer block party. In between, I had learned more about HOA bylaws and state noise ordinances than I ever wanted to know. I had also learned something more important about standing up for yourself and not letting people abuse their power just because they can. My phone buzzed again. Another text from another resident with another question about HOA rules. I answered it, providing the relevant section of the bylaws and offering to meet if they needed more help. This had become my unofficial role in the neighborhood. The guy who knew the rules and was not afraid to fight when those rules were applied unfairly. It was not a role I had asked for, but it was one I was willing to fulfill. Because someone needed to. Someone needed to be the person who said no when unreasonable demands were made. Someone needed to stand between the Brendas of the world and the people just trying to live their lives in peace. The funny thing was, If someone had told me 2 years ago that I would become that person, I would have laughed. I had moved to Meadowbrook Springs because I wanted a quiet suburban life. I wanted to go to work, come home, grill dinner, and watch television. I did not want drama or conflict or HOA board meetings, but life does not always give you what you want. Sometimes it gives you what you need. And what I needed was to learn that I could stand up for myself, that I could fight back against unfairness, that I did not have to accept things just because someone in authority said that was the way things were. The generator was still in my garage. The leaf blowers were still running on Saturday mornings, but now they were quiet electric ones that nobody minded. Brenda was in Arizona, probably making some other HOA miserable. And I was sitting on my front porch on a beautiful summer evening, content with my life and my choices. It had been a long journey from that first certified letter to this moment of peace, but it had been worth it. Every frustrating meeting, every carefully worded response letter, every hour spent documenting compliance with obscure regulations, all of it had been worth it to reach this point where I could sit on my porch and know that I had made my corner of the world a little bit better. Deanna came back downstairs in comfortable clothes, her hair still damp from the shower. She sat down next to me on the porch swing and I put my arm around her shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How lucky I am," I said. "Because of the generator," she teased. "Because I found something worth fighting for," I said. "And because I had people who supported me through it," she kissed my cheek. "You would have fought anyway, that is who you are." Maybe she was right. Maybe I would have fought regardless. But having her support and Margaret's support, and the support of all those other residents who were tired of being pushed around, had made all the difference. Fighting alone is exhausting. Fighting with allies is empowering. As the summer progressed, the neighborhood continued to change for the better. The new board was more transparent about their decisions. They posted minutes from every meeting on the HOA website. They created an email address where residents could submit questions or concerns directly to the board. They eliminated several outdated and overly restrictive rules that served no practical purpose. In August, there was an incident that really showed how much things had changed. A family on Maple Street received a violation notice because their teenage son had painted a mural on their backyard fence. The mural was actually quite good, a colorful landscape scene with mountains and trees. But technically, the HOA rules stated that fences must be either natural wood color or painted in approved neutral tones. Under the old administration, that family would have been forced to paint over the mural or face fines. Under the new administration, Tom Reynolds called a special meeting to discuss whether the rule needed to be changed. The board voted to allow artistic murals on backyard fences as long as they were not visible from the street and did not contain offensive content. The family got to keep their mural, and several other families started planning their own backyard art projects. It was a small thing, but it represented a fundamental shift in philosophy. The old HOA had been about control and uniformity. The new HOA was about community and common sense. In September, I got an unexpected phone call from a reporter at the local newspaper. She had heard about the generator dispute and wanted to write a story about HOA overreach and reform. "I do not know," I said hesitantly. "I am not really looking for publicity." "I understand," she said, "but your story is important. A lot of people are dealing with similar situations in their own neighborhoods. Hearing about how you successfully pushed back might inspire them to do the same." I talked it over with Deanna. She thought I should do it. "You have already helped so many people in this neighborhood. Think about how many more you could help if the story reaches a wider audience." So I agreed to the interview. The reporter came to my house on a Saturday afternoon. We sat at my kitchen table, and I walked her through everything that had happened. The generator, the leaf blowers, the harassment, the board meetings, the eventual reform. She took notes and asked thoughtful questions. The article came out 2 weeks later on the front page of the local section. It was titled, "Homeowner Takes on HOA and Wins, a Story of Standing Up to Abuse of Power." The reporter had done a great job capturing the story while also providing useful information about HOA rights and responsibilities. She interviewed Margaret Chen and Tom Reynolds as well, getting their perspectives on how the neighborhood had changed. The response was overwhelming. I received dozens of emails and phone calls from people in other neighborhoods who were dealing with similar issues. Some wanted advice. Some just wanted to share their own stories. Some wanted to know how they could start reform efforts in their own communities. I did my best to help everyone who reached out. I shared copies of the documentation I had created. I explained the research I had done on state laws and local ordinances. I talked people through the process of organizing other residents and building support for change. It became almost like a second job, but it was rewarding in a way that my regular job never had been. In October, I was invited to speak at a state housing committee meeting about HOA reform. I was nervous about it, but Deanna convinced me to go. I drove down to Springfield on a Tuesday morning and found myself in a government building, sitting at a table in front of a panel of state legislators. I told my story again, but this time I focused on the broader implications. I talked about how HOAs were supposed to protect property values and maintain neighborhoods, but how they often became vehicles for petty tyrants to harass their neighbors. I talked about the need for better oversight and clearer rules about what HOAs could and could not do. I talked about the importance of transparency and accountability. The legislators asked good questions. One of them said he had received numerous complaints about HOA overreach in his district, but had not known what to do about it. Another said she was part of an HOA in her own neighborhood and recognized some of the problems I described. They all thanked me for taking the time to testify. A few months later, I learned that the state legislature was considering a bill that would create new protections for homeowners and require more transparency from HOAs. I do not know if my testimony had anything to do with it, but I like to think it helped. The holidays came, and the neighborhood looked like a Christmas card. Lights on every house, wreaths on every door, inflatable snowmen and reindeer on every lawn. Under the old administration, there had been strict rules about holiday decorations. They could only go up after Thanksgiving and had to come down by January 10th. Lights had to be white or clear, no colors allowed. Inflatable decorations were prohibited. The new board had eliminated most of those rules. As long as decorations were taken down by the end of January and were not causing any safety hazards, people could decorate however they wanted. The neighborhood was a riot of color and creativity, and it was beautiful. Deanna and I hosted a Christmas party at our house. We invited neighbors from up and down the street, people we had gotten to know over the past year. Margaret came, and Tom and Susan, even some of the residents I had helped with their HOA disputes. My house was full of laughter and conversation and the smell of cookies baking. At one point, Tom Reynolds pulled me aside. "I wanted you to know that Brenda's house finally sold. The new owners seem nice. They have 2 young kids." "That is good," I said. "I hope they enjoy living here." "I think they will," Tom said. "It is a much better neighborhood now than it was a year ago. Thanks in large part to you." "Thanks in large part to all of us," I corrected. "You are the one who has to actually run the HOA now. That is not an easy job." "No, But it is a lot easier when people trust you to do the right thing, Tom said. And that trust exists because you showed everyone that it was possible to hold leadership accountable. As the party wound down and guests started heading home, I stood at the window watching the colored lights twinkling on houses up and down the street. My generator was still in the garage, silent and ready. The leaf blowers were still running on Saturday mornings, but quietly now. Brenda was gone, living her life somewhere in Arizona. And I was here in my home, in my neighborhood, surrounded by people who had become more than just neighbors. They had become friends and allies and proof that communities could change for the better when people were willing to work together. The generator saga had started with a simple question. Why was my emergency backup generator considered a violation when the HOA's own landscaping equipment was 10 times louder and ran for hours every week? That question had led to a journey I never expected, one that taught me about courage and persistence and the importance of standing up for what is right. It would have been easy to give in, to remove the generator, pay the fine, and keep my head down. A lot of people would have done exactly that. But I had decided that some things were worth fighting for, and personal principles were one of them. If I had backed down, Brenda would have continued her reign of petty tyranny. Other residents would have continued to suffer under unfair rules and arbitrary enforcement. The neighborhood would have remained a place of fear and resentment instead of becoming a place of community and cooperation. One person really could make a difference, but only if they were willing to take that first step and stand up when everyone else was sitting down. As winter turned to spring again, marking a full year since Brenda had left the neighborhood, I reflected on everything that had changed. The HOA had new leadership, new policies, and a new culture of fairness and transparency. The neighborhood felt alive in a way it had not before, with people actually talking to each other and working together instead of living in fear of the next violation notice. My generator had only run twice since the original ice storm that started everything. Both times were brief power outages, and both times it performed exactly as it was supposed to. Nobody complained. Nobody filed violation notices. It was just a useful piece of equipment that did its job when needed and otherwise sat quietly in my garage. Deanna and I got engaged in April. I proposed to her on our back porch, the same place where we had sat so many times over the past year, talking about HOA drama and neighborhood politics and life in general. She said yes, and we started planning a wedding for the fall. We talked about buying a bigger house eventually, maybe something with more land farther outside of town. But for now, we were happy where we were. This house had become more than just a place to live. It had become the setting for one of the most important chapters of my life, the place where I learned that I could stand up for myself and make a real difference in my community. In May, I received a letter from the state legislature. The HOA reform bill had passed and been signed into law by the governor. It would go into effect in January of the following year. The letter thanked me for my testimony and noted that my story had been cited multiple times during legislative debates as an example of why reform was necessary. I showed the letter to Deanna, feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment. My fight over a generator had contributed in some small way to changing the laws that would protect homeowners across the entire state. It was not something I had set out to do. I had just wanted to keep my generator and maybe make my own neighborhood a little bit better. But sometimes the ripple effects of standing up for what is right extend farther than you ever imagined. The neighborhood continued to thrive under the new leadership. Property values actually increased, despite Brenda's dire predictions that loosening restrictions would cause them to plummet. Turns out that people wanted to live in neighborhoods where they were treated fairly, and could actually enjoy their homes without constant fear of violation notices. More families moved in. The demographics shifted younger as older residents downsized and moved out. The neighborhood became more diverse, more vibrant, more alive. The HOA organized more community events. Summer concerts in the park, fall festivals, winter holiday parties. People actually wanted to participate because they felt like they were part of something positive instead of just subjects of an authoritarian regime. I continued to help residents who had questions about HOA rules or who were dealing with disputes. But those cases became rarer as the new board established a pattern of fairness and common sense. Most issues were resolved quickly and reasonably, without the need for extensive documentation or formal hearings. In August, I ran into Margaret Chen at the grocery store. We chatted for a few minutes, catching up on neighborhood news. "You ever think about what things would be like if you had not fought back?" she asked. "Sometimes," I admitted. "I think Brenda would still be running things. People would still be miserable. Nothing would have changed." "Exactly," Margaret said. "One person really can change everything. You proved that." "I had a lot of help," I said. "You had help once you got started," Margaret corrected. "But you had to be willing to take that first step alone. That takes courage. Not everyone has that." I thought about her words as I drove home. She was right that I had taken the first step alone. When I received that initial violation notice about my generator, I could have just given up. I could have removed the generator, paid the fine, and moved on with my life. Nobody would have blamed me. It would have been the easier path, but something in me had rebelled against the unfairness of it. Something had said that this was wrong and needed to be challenged. And that something had led me down a path that changed not just my life, but the lives of everyone in my neighborhood and potentially thousands of homeowners across the state. Diana and I got married in October in a ceremony held in our backyard. Half the neighborhood came to the wedding. Margaret and Tom were there, along with Susan and dozens of other residents who had become friends over the past 2 years. We danced under string lights as the sun set, celebrating not just our marriage but the community we had all built together. During the reception, Tom gave a toast that made me tear up. Lucas came to our neighborhood 2 years ago just looking for a place to live. He ended up showing us what it means to stand up for what is right. He fought for his generator, but he was really fighting for all of us. For the right to live in a neighborhood governed by fairness instead of fear. To Lucas and Deanna, may your marriage be as strong as Lucas's commitment to justice. Everyone cheered and clinked glasses. I looked around at all the smiling faces and felt overwhelming gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this moment. As the evening wound down and guests started heading home, Diana and I stood alone in our backyard, just the two of us under the fading light. "This has been quite a 2 years," she said. "That is an understatement," I replied. "You think things will stay this good?" she asked. "Or will someone else like Brenda come along eventually?" "Maybe," I said honestly. "People like that always exist. But the difference now is that everyone knows it is possible to stand up to them. They have seen that it can work. That makes all the difference." She smiled and leaned against me. "You are my hero, you know that." "For fighting about a generator?" I asked with a laugh. "For being willing to fight at all," she said. "For not backing down when it would have been easier. For showing everyone, including me, what real courage looks like." We stood there in comfortable silence, listening to the quiet sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the night. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the low hum of someone's electric lawn mower. From a few houses over came the sound of kids laughing. A dog barked. A car door closed. These were the sounds of a normal, peaceful neighborhood. A place where people could live their lives without fear of arbitrary rules or petty tyrants. A place where a man could install a generator to protect his home during power outages without being harassed. A place where fairness and common sense prevailed. It had taken a fight to get here. It had required courage and persistence, and a willingness to stand alone when necessary. But it had been worth every frustrating meeting, every carefully documented measurement, every hour spent researching bylaws and state ordinances. My generator sat in the garage, ready for the next emergency but otherwise forgotten. The leaf blowers ran on Saturday mornings, quietly doing their job without disturbing anyone. Brenda was gone, and a new family lived in her house, happily adding their own color and energy to the neighborhood. And I was here, married to the woman I loved, surrounded by a community that had learned the value of standing together against injustice. It was not the life I had planned when I first moved to Meadowbrook Springs. It was better. Because sometimes the most important battles are the ones you never expected to fight. Sometimes a simple dispute about a generator becomes a catalyst for real change. And sometimes one person's willingness to say no to unfairness inspires an entire community to demand better. That was my story. That was my legacy. Not the guy who fought about a generator, but the guy who showed a neighborhood what was possible when people refused to accept being pushed around. And every time I heard those quiet electric leaf blowers on Saturday mornings, I smiled and remembered that change really was possible. All it took was someone willing to take that first step.